Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is October 5th. Well, my husband and I have this tradition where we sit down, usually on the weekends, sometimes even during the week, if it's a really busy week, and we plan our calendar and we kind of sync up a little bit. And then we get in touch with the kids that we need to make sure that they're on board as well. But in doing this little ritual, we've started adding in the forecast, the weather forecast, because I spend so much time as of late trying to get caught up in the gardens at the cabin and here in Maple Grove. And today, it's going to be a very cold and rainy day in Minnesota, definitely feeling like fall more and more as this week goes on. And by tomorrow, it was supposed to be very cold, but it looks like that's getting pushed out a little bit more till Friday. As per usual, my eyes are bigger than what my energy has time to actually put in the ground. And so I figure I'll be spending most of my day tomorrow getting shrubs and perennials placed and planted in time for the cold weather. And then after that, the sprinkler systems will be getting shut off. And then it'll just be sweatshirt weather in the garden. And I'll be doing a little bit of cleanup and some painting. I always like to do some last little touches of painting as I head into winter. Put an extra coat of polyurethane on some of the wooden or ironwork that's in the garden. And then, of course, lighting, paying attention to all of the exterior lighting. You know, here in Maple Grove and at the cabin, we put in these string cafe lights. They're my favorite cafe light. They're LED. They're really, really cute. They've got a really nice, soft, warm, white light. And I love how long lasting they are. But I need to make sure that they're set, and I need to get any of the bulbs replaced and put all that together in time for winter, because I don't want to be going out there when we've got a foot of snow. And you know, the first year we did this, the first year we installed those cafe lights, we just strung them from tree to tree, and that worked pretty well until we would get a really bad storm or any type of freezing rain, and then the lines would snap. And so one of the things we've learned is to anchor those cafe lights to some black rope. So I just ordered some simple black rope on Amazon, and now I zip tie the cafe lights to the rope about every 2 to 3 feet, and that takes off the pressure on the line, and they've been holding up great. So we're going to reconfigure what we're doing here in the Maple Grove garden in our city garden, and my son Will is going to come up and help me with that next Monday, so we'll be working on that. Then there'll just be a few other little projects that I'll be sharing with you later on in the month. Busy month. October is always very, very busy. All right. Well, today is National Pumpkin Seed Day. So yay for pumpkin seeds. And it's also a good reminder to go out and get your pumpkins. This is a great week to do that. You know, up at the cabin, we are within a mile of one of the best little pumpkin patches I have ever seen in my life. They grow so many different varieties, even the blue French pumpkins, my favorite. Oh my goodness. So I cannot wait to head over there and pick up some. But they also have great squash and gourds and many pumpkins and Indian corn, all kinds of things. Great, great activities for the kids. So always have a good time there. But you know, when it comes to pumpkin seeds, one of the questions that I usually hear is, how do you know if a pumpkin has a lot of seeds? And Kitchen.com offered these tips. They said, first, choose a large pumpkin because It's the bigger pumpkins, not heavier, but bigger in size, that will generally yield more seeds. Now, with this, I always say trust and verify, because who knows the pumpkins best? Well, that would be the pumpkin grower. So if you're at a pumpkin patch and you can speak to the grower, ask them which varieties they're growing that yield the most seeds. And then the other tip that kitchen.com recommends is to tap on the pumpkin. And if it sounds hollow, that can indicate that there's a large seed cavity with plenty of space for all of those seeds. And don't forget, if you're going to roast your pumpkin seeds, you want to soak them first, because if you soak your pumpkin seeds, you'll actually end up with a crunchier finished pumpkin seed. So soaking the seeds first is definitely worth it. Just put them in a bowl of water. I usually use warm water, and then add a little bit of salt and let them soak overnight. And what that's going to do is it's going to soften those seeds up and make it so that they crisp beautifully in the oven. Just bake them at 275 degrees for about 45 minutes. And about every 15 minutes, you're going to go in there and stir them up a little bit. But it's that low and slow heat, along with the soaking of those seeds, that's going to make them turn out perfectly. All right, let's get to today's garden history. Today in garden history, we remember Joachim Patinir, the Flemish Northern Renaissance artist who died on this day, October 5th, in 1524. A history and landscape painter from the area of modern Wallonia, Joachim invented landscape painting as an independent genre. Joachim's landscapes feature a panoramic view of Northern Renaissance countrysides that are enhanced by naturalistic details and fantasy. And in most of his paintings, the perspective is from a high point overlooking large vistas that meld into forests and meadows, and that have hazy mountains, rivers, and skies off in the distance. Joachim's paintings have an element of sadness and mystery to them, and often throughout the painting, Joachim would add tiny figures of people going about their day. One of Joachim's signature elements in his landscapes were these enormous boulders and rocks that were placed in the landscape, often quite abruptly. And in botanical painting, there are entire YouTube videos devoted to how to paint boulders, stone, and rock in the landscape. It's not easy to do. And garden landscapes themselves can often be a challenge for new painters because they are so busy that it can be hard to find a focal point. Gardens offer so much detail, and sometimes it can be just too much, especially for beginning painters. Think of all the colors, textures, highlights, shadows, patterns, lines, and shapes. So sometimes if you're a new painter, it helps to simplify the scope of your painting, narrow in on a few essential flowers, plants, or other elements. And art experts suggest that it helps to pay attention to your first impression of the garden. What were your eyes drawn to? What details grasp your attention? And what elements are just background noise? And today we also celebrate the birth of Merritt Lyndon Fernald, the American botanist who was born on this day, October 5th, in 1873. Merritt wrote over 800 papers, and he co-authored Edible Wild Plants of Eastern North America in 1919 with Alfred Kinsey, the American Scientologist and sexologist. On one of his herbarium sheets, Merritt once wrote a quick poem about the rhodora, the pink blooming azalea found in the northeastern United States. Merritt wrote, "The gay rhodora long the margin stands, forerunner of the summer's fairer rose. Yet coming as she does to open spring's lands, she brightens every mood wherein she blows. Well, Merritt is remembered as the father of Newfoundland botany. And today, the Merritt Lyndon Fernald Award is given by the New England Botanical Club, the group that publishes the botanical journal called the Rhodora. Beautiful kismet there. Well, the award that the club gives is generally given annually, although they don't always have a winner every year. And the criteria for the award is that it is to recognize a paper that was published in the Rhodora Journal, and the paper has to make use of herbarium specimens and or involve field work, so getting out in nature. And recipients of the award get some recognition. They receive $1,000 and a certificate. And the award is usually presented in May at the New England Botanical Club meeting. The last winner was in 2019. It was a small group of scientists, McDonough Mackenzie, Kevin Barrand, and Kristen Haynes, who wrote about the best practices in creating common garden experiments. McDonough said, "We wrote the paper that we all wished we could have read at the beginning of our graduate projects, a review of common garden research in the Northeast." Well, if you were to write a paper about your garden discoveries this year, what would you write about? Or if a paper is too daunting, what about a top 10 or top 5 list? Takeaways from your time in the garden this year? Well, mine would include getting comfortable with the flame weeder. I've always been a little afraid of that, and so learning to get comfortable with it has been a skill that I acquired this year in the garden. Very glad that I did. Another would be, for me, tracking my mulch orders so that in 2023, I can have fewer deliveries, and also hopefully to mitigate any supply chain issues with just one giant order in the spring. And that is something that in the past hasn't bothered me so much, but with the pandemic and all of the supply chain issues, I really wanted to pay attention this year so that I could just make one order in the spring of 2023 and then restock from that for the garden. Another takeaway from my cabin garden this year is the work that I'm doing to help reforest small areas. I am planting a little mini forest, and also I installed a little mini orchard early this spring up at the cabin, and that was a long time goal. And so to get going on both of those efforts has been very, very satisfying. And on one of my 5 apple trees that I installed there, I got one apple, and it was just so exciting to see that one little perfect apple on the tree. But I'm off to the races. I now have apples and plums and pears and cherries up at the cabin. So I'm very happy about that. And then another takeaway that's worth noting is the workhorse that is my outdoor potting bench area. That was something that I installed during the pandemic with my son. We got some lumber from a deck that was being dismantled, and we took it all apart and repurposed it into an outdoor potting bench area. And we also repurposed an outdoor wooden lounge chair and turned that into a large potting station. And both of those pieces have definitely served and continue to be such workhorses in the garden. And then I think my final takeaway is the work that I've started doing transforming my suburban garden from an ornamental garden into a lower maintenance shrub garden here in Maple Grove as my husband and I become empty nesters. So that, in a nutshell, is my garden for 2023. Just a quick little list, but worth writing down. It's not quite on the level of the 800 papers that Merritt Fernald wrote, but it is a worthy endeavor and something that your future self will thank you for. All right, and today we also celebrate the birthday of John Erskine, the American educator, author, pianist, and composer. He was born on this day, October 5th, in 1879. When he was a young boy, John actually went by horse and carriage to his piano lessons. And then he came back home and practiced on the family Steinway grand piano. An incredibly accomplished man, John Erskine is remembered most for his book, The Moral Obligation to be Intelligent, which was published in 1915. And John is also remembered for this quote: "Music is the only language in which you cannot say a mean or sarcastic thing." John was also a gardener, and he once wrote, "I have never had so many good ideas day after day as when I worked in the garden." Well, this is such a great point. The garden is a beautiful place to think and to ideate. It's just like the shower. And that's why in all of my showers, I have the Aqua Notes waterproof notepad. It's right there attached to the wall, and it's a great place to quickly jot down ideas before they go down the drain. And so in the garden, I like to do the same thing. I carry a little small moleskin journal in both my apron and in my garden tote. So handy, so that when I have an idea or a thought that I want to remember, I can just quickly jot it down there. So if you are like John Erskine and you have all of your good ideas as you're in the garden working, make sure to have something handy, whether it's your phone or a little notebook, where you can capture all of your good ideas. And it was on this day, October 5th in 2017, that Liza Picard's book, Chaucer's People, Everyday Lives in Medieval England, was published. In the book, Liza reveals the food sources of medieval times, and I thought this was absolutely fascinating. Liza wrote, "Figs were imported from Malta, dates and raisins from Damascus, and sugar from Sicily was preferable to honey as a sweetener in aristocratic kitchens, since it could be confected into those impressive subtleties. Anything grown in England was sold only in its natural season. Green peas were eaten raw and delicious. No one thought of cooking them. Other vegetables were being grown in a garden in Stepney by Henry Daniel, a contemporary of Chaucer, and he recommended turnips, borage, mallows, and orach for porridge, the kind of food the ordinary man depended on. Chestnuts could be roasted, and parsnip, that wholesome food, could be both baked and fried." A little look back at medieval England, thanks to Liza Picard. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Becoming a Gardener by Katie Merritt. This book came out in May of 2022. It's hot off the press. It's one of my favorites. And the subtitle is What Reading and Digging Taught Me About Living. Well, Katie found inspiration to write this book from one of my favorite quotes by Cicero, and that is, "If you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need." And when I started the podcast, The Daily Gardener, I kind of quote hacked or hijacked that quote because I said, if you have a garden podcast, and a library, you have everything you need. But nevertheless, Katie found that quote to be incredibly inspiring. And it got her thinking about the powerful way that literature and gardening can affect our lives. This book tells the story of the 18 months that Katie devoted herself to creating a brand new garden in her new home in Connecticut. In the introduction to her book, Katie writes, "To feel rooted, I had to put down roots. Literally. As the old proverb goes, necessity is the mother of invention, and to turn our house into a home, I'd root myself to the land, which is what drew me to the spot in the first place. Once again, I found myself thinking of gardens, and it certainly seemed as good a time as any to attempt to become a gardener. And so what began as a desire to feel rooted in a new home with my children and Don, my husband of 30 years, became something else entirely. I decided to give myself 18 months, thinking this would allow me enough time to design the garden and watch a full year's plant cycle. Little did I know how much the world would change in that time, both globally and for me personally. In the beginning, I thought all I needed was gardening advice, basic information on how to lay out a garden and what plants to grow. And as it happened, I needed and I discovered so much more. Well, doesn't that sound amazing? Well, that is just a little taste for you of Katie's very friendly conversational tone. I love this book. It's one of my favorite books for 2022. No doubt, the New York Times loved Katie's book. They wrote, "Her exuberance for a gardener's life of the mind will have you reaching into your library for old favorites and finding new friends." Very true. Well, when Katie decided to start gardening, it was coincidentally when the pandemic was starting. And so she started gardening alongside millions of other new gardeners all around the world. So many people turned to gardening as a way to cope with the pandemic, as a way to not only sustain themselves and their families with edibles, but also with the therapeutic and visual benefits of just spending time in the garden, spending time surrounded by beauty, by nature, with the wind, with the birds, and the wildlife. So restorative. Well, anyway, I could go on and on about this book, but I'll just end with this little piece of inspiration from Katie's book. Gardening and reading, memory and imagination all weave together in books and in life. Perhaps the power of literature and nature are one and the same, calling on gardeners and readers to recruit both their imaginations and their memories to cultivate special places of their own. Such a good book. Okay, enough. You can get a copy of Becoming a Gardener by Katie Merritt and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $28. So good. All right. Finally, we end the show today with a botanic spark that celebrates the birthday of Robin Lane Fox, the English classicist, ancient historian, and garden writer. He was born on this day, October 5th, in 1946. And Robin has served as the garden columnist for the Financial Times for over 50 years. And in Robin's 1982 book called Better Gardening, he humorously wrote, "I will keep returning to the virtues of sharp and swift drainage, whether a plant prefers to be wet or dry." I would have called this book Better Drains, but you would have never bought it or borrowed it for bedtime. Well, I love that. Better Drains instead of Better Gardening. But the Better Gardening book, irrespective of the title, is wonderful. It's a garden classic. And I know if you're a longtime gardener, you completely concur with Robin on drainage. Drainage is the name of the game when it comes to good gardening, or in Robin's words, better gardening. So true. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to The Daily Gardener. I hope that you're able to get some pumpkin seeds or maybe even just go out and get some pumpkins today and keep going on getting your garden put to bed for winter. Very important work to be done. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.